All right, everybody. Welcome to this is the first show of 2019 of The Journey. I'm super excited to be back with you guys. My first guest is Don Maines. Don,
yes,
thanks for joining us. Don, his card says he's a substance abuse research and program manager. He's a special advisor to Sheriff Scott Israel in Broward. But to me, I've heard Don speak, 3, 4, 5 times, and there's probably nobody who knows more about what's going on with the street drugs, certainly here in South Florida, than Don. And so I pretty much begged him to come on the show, and he's just had shoulder surgery, so I'm really glad that he's here. And I should also tell everybody that during the show or even afterwards, if you guys have questions or comments either for me or for Don, post them, and we'll do the best we can to respond to everybody. But Don, I'm really glad to have you.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here.
Thanks for
with my scrubby beard, but like you said,
look
I just had shoulder surgery, so I can't shave. So.
Yeah, so I was complaining before the show that I turned 52 yesterday, and Don's like, well, I'm 70 years old, and meanwhile, I don't know, he looks pretty good for a guy who just had shoulder surgery and 70 years old.
I got to get back on the horse.
You got to, yeah. So let's, because you've got a really interesting history. And so I only really knew you as the guy that knew everything about the street drugs, but there is so much more that's going on. So. Let's go back a little bit in time and tell us how did you end up working for the sheriff? Like, where did all this start? Because I know that you're also from recovery, and you probably get it more than maybe 99% of the people out there as to what's going on.
Well, as I said, and I don't hold back. I've been in recovery. It'll be 31 years, May 21st. And when I got into recovery, I made a complete life change. I went back to college. I got different degrees, and I started and was the director of the Member Assistance Program back in 1989 and the early 90s, and I worked for Port Everglades. It was really one of the first jobs I ever had that I didn't own the company. And I put in 10 years there, and then I went into a practice with Dr. Ryan at the Family Institute, and I interned under him for another little over 10 years. And during that time, I was able to, not just having the member assistance program, but I was able to be involved in starting drug court with Judge Fogan, and then developing alternative sentencing programs for the drug court.
So this is down in Broward, right? Because
it's in Fort Lauderdale.
So you were one of the founders of the drug court down there?
For Fort Lauderdale.
Wow, that's amazing.
It was a pleasure.
Keeping a lot of people out of jail and out of prison.
Well, and educating the prosecutors and the judges at that time, because they wanted to lock them up and throw away the key. That's just what you did. And we were really just dealing with alcohol at that time. And so we had to change the whole mindset to that recovery works and get families back together and make them healthy, happy members of society again. And over the years, it finally took. Like one of the prosecutors, or was a prosecutor, became a judge, was Judge Spicer. Which just retired last month. But he was one of the ones that said, no, lock them up, throw away the key. You can never change them, you can never change the mindset. And then when crack cocaine started, he was convinced that you could never turn around a crack addict. Well, over the years, Judge Spicer turned around, and he used to be our spokesman for our drug court graduations.
Yeah, I know he is some of our Marchman and guardianship cases.
Exactly, and mental health court. But he completely turned around and believed that recovery works. So he was a great advocate for what we were doing. So I was asked by Sheriff Lamberti to start a volunteer mounted unit for the BSO, and all non-sworn volunteers. And then when Sheriff Scott Israel came in, he knew my background, and he believed in recovery. So he came to me and said, Don, I want you to come to work for the Broward Sheriff's Office and work with the community programs.
So how long ago was that?
Actually, just 5 years ago.
Okay.
Right, I just got my 5-year pin in November. So, and that's what started what we're doing now. And then we started getting hit with all these street drugs. And that's when we fell right into it. And it was March 14, 2015. The community of Pompano Beach came out to Sheriff Scott Israel and said, Sheriff, there's some new drug on our streets. We don't know what it is. It's devastating our people, zombie-like behavior. Can you help us? I happened to meet the sheriff that same night at another fundraiser, and he said, Don, what is this drug? And I didn't even know.
So were you working with the sheriff back then, for Scott Israel back then?
Yes.
Okay, so, and I know that you're a certified addictions professional. Were you still doing your private practice with treatments and stuff, or no?
Yes.
You were? Okay, so you had that going on too.
I was doing that on the side at the time.
Got it. Okay.
Yes.
And I know that you're, for lack of a better, a horsey guy, right? We joked before that as soon as you get your shoulder fixed,
I got to get back at
get
it.
it back on the horse. And I was saying that a couple of weeks ago I was down on Los Osos and I saw a police officer on a huge horse, and you're like, yeah, I started that.
I didn't start that, but I helped train their horses for gunfire, because one of the things that I do in the rodeo is I do cowboy mounted shooting. So I shoot off my horses for competition. And it's not like Hollywood. You can take one shot off any horse, but don't try taking the second.
Well, the horse flips out.
Oh, they're going to start bucking all over the place. So it's a long process, and I train horses for shooting and for competition. And that's when I finally did my shoulder in November for. It was up in Ocala, another competition. I knew I needed surgery, but I could still move the arm. But the horse acted up and pulled the shoulder out and tore the tendons off. So that made up my mind that I can't wait anymore.
Time to fix it.
I had to get it fixed.
All right. So let's go back to the drug thing, because that's what I got you here. So this is 2015. There's this new drug that's coming out on the street.
Exactly.
So let's talk about that. Is that the whole Flocka thing?
Well, that's when it came out. And that Monday is when I started doing research, because I didn't know anything about it. The first interview I did was a guy that was down here, a long-term heroin addict, IV heroin. I interviewed him because he was on this new drug, which I named Flocka, which means pretty, skinny, elegant woman that charms all that she meets. That's because of the Spanish influences down here in Florida.
Who knew that?
But around the rest of the country, it didn't start here. I actually started in San Francisco, LA, San Diego, into Colorado a little bit. Actually went over to Maine, and then went all the way around, came back into Broward County. When it was around the rest of the country, it was called gravel, strictly because it looked like gravel. So that Monday, that's this first interview that I did, long-term heroin IV user, went out to buy heroin. They gave him alpha PVP, which we called Flocka. He hated it. He hated the thoughts. He hated the high. He hated the coming down. He hated everything about the drug. But 4 days later, he'd relapse again.
So I got a question. We've seen sort of you see videos online of people who are on Flocka. They're running into walls. They're running into windows.
Yes.
So I mean, what was the big, I guess, leap, as it were, in terms of the influence of Flocka and what it does to people from, say, crack cocaine?
Well, the Flocka is a cathinone. Now we had,
which means,
and the reason that,
what does that mean? Because I mean,
it comes from a plant, the cat plant.
Got it. Okay.
And it's synthesized from the cat plant and called a cathinone, which is in the same family as bath salts, molly, methylone, ethylone, tertalone. It's all from the cat plant. But when bath salts was coming in from China, it was becoming too popular. It was devastating our people. We went to China. They outlawed bath salts, which was methylone. So the bad guys are making too much money. So what they did is they tweaked a molecule, and they came up with the next generation, which was ethylone, which was molly, and the same thing happened. Became too popular, making too much money. Went back to China, got that outlawed. Then they tweaked another molecule again to come up with alpha PVP.
So why do they tweak the molecules? Because I think one of the things I heard you talk about once was if we've got a sort of statute on the books which outlaws a certain drug, they change something so that it no longer fits into that box, and now it's for a little while we're behind the times.
And this gets back to years ago when we were dealing with the original spice and K2, which was considered synthetic marijuana. We would list all the components with legislation and make it illegal. The bad guys would tweak one molecule, and the next day it was back on the shelves in all the convenience stores.
It was legal
again because they changed the molecule. Now, some people would say, well, why don't you just write in legislation that any drug that the brain reacts in an addictive manner to and outlaw it, which seems logical. But then some new lawyer would come in, because we did try to do that. Some new lawyer would come in, try to make a name for himself and appeal it, and they always won. So to this day, all they have to do is tweak a molecule, and they still can make the drug legal again, coming in from wherever, Mexico or China. And just getting back to spice and K2, synthetic marijuana, what's on the streets today is completely different than what was out there 10 or 12 years ago when we were dealing with the convenience stores, even though they're still selling it there. People don't realize that one of the biggest crops in China is tobacco. So the Chinese government have found a new way to get rid of their tobacco crop is they chop it up and they spray it with an average of 4 different cathinones, which is bath salts, moly, ethylone, methylone, alpha PVP, and they change the molecule almost weekly, so we can't outlaw it. So it's still coming in legally, and then besides that, we can't come up with a drug test for it. So we have kids in some of our programs, civil citation programs or whatever that I talk to, and I try to tell them how dangerous synthetic drugs are, that they're 10 times more dangerous than a natural drug. But then they come back to me and they say, well, I have to smoke synthetic marijuana. What do you mean you have to? My parents drug test me, or the program in drug test me. They know that it doesn't show up in any drug test, but it gives their parents a false sense of security. Because I talk to these parents all the time.
They think they're not using and they are.
Oh, my son is clean. I test them. Well, the kid knows that the synthetic drugs don't show up in a drug test. So a lot of times they might go through a whole program getting high, using. So you can't rely on a drug test anymore. You have to look at behavior. And you've got to check, parents have to look at behavior. And it's, the same old thing is, how do you tell when a teenager's lying? Their mouth is open.
Well, and most parents tell me when I ask them, sometimes they'll tell me, I say, how do you know your child's using? They'll say, I just know. And there are certain things, right? Their eating habits are off, their school habits are off.
Exactly.
They're
and
not
the parents
bathing.
want to believe the best out of their children. They want to believe a lie, and usually it comes down to because they don't have proper parenting skills. I hate to say that, but you can only parent as good as you had as a child. And even though you knew that there was something wrong with the way you were growing up, and you swore that when you grew up and have kids, you're never going to treat your child that way, you wake up one morning, you're doing the exact same thing because it's a learned behavior. And you can only do as good as what you got.
Right. So, every time I hear you speak, and I hear you speak probably every couple of months, there's sort of you talk about a new drug that's come out. So maybe let's go back in time a little bit and try and get some idea as to where this source came from, because it's not just Palm Beach County, although obviously we're sort of at the epicenter of it, but it's like nationwide. I hear people from Ohio talking about the fact that all over the country we're dealing with issues of addiction and mental illness. So it must have come from somewhere. So where have we been able to sort of get an idea as to what started it? I know down here we had the issues with the pill mills.
Well, we had more pill mills in Broward County than we had McDonald's. And, that was really the cause of the crust of what we got into with the problem we're having today. But just finishing up when I was talking about the alpha PVP, the Flocka problem, we dealt with that. The one person I was talking about, I saw him after he relapsed the 4th time. And he said, if anyone ever did a psychological evaluation on me while I was using that drug, they would say I was totally insane. And then he went on to say, it's a $5 insanity. Well, he doesn't realize it, but he was one that coined the phrase, because every news report, TV, or magazine article after that called it the $5 insanity drug. So we were dealing with that, and we're dealing with the excited deliriums. And if you look on YouTube or anywhere, Broward County was the epicenter of all this. And all the research that was done on alpha PVP actually came from Broward County. We were the first county in the nation that started a team, the Community Action Team. Actually, the original was the Flocka Action Team, which has morphed into the Community Action Team, which was the Broward Sheriff's Office, the United Way Board of Governors Commission on Substance Abuse, Broward Healthcare System, Nova Southeast with Jim Hall, the medical examiner. And we all worked together to come up to deal with this drug, Flocka, and the excited deliriums, and as you said, the high body temperatures, the running around naked, the weird behavior, because the body temperature will go up between 105 and 108 degrees, and then at that point,
isn't that deadly?
The muscle starts to melt, and as the muscle starts to melt, it goes through the circulatory system and clogs up the liver and kidney. That process is called rhabdomyolysis. So that's when you get sent to the emergency room, try to get the temperature brought
So
back
those organs
down.
are basically breaking down, and then the particles are going into the
And
bloodstream.
we don't know how many people, because we didn't keep really proper statistics at the time, how many people wound up on colostomy bags and dialysis for the rest of their life because of those high body temperatures. So this major problem that we were dealing with, we went back to China in October We only dealt with the Flocka problem down here for about 9 months. We went back to China, and we got China to outlaw 116 different chemicals, dealing with bath salts and molly and Flocka, methadone, ethylone. We knew that was going to deplete the shelves. And we also got intel that new drugs would be coming in if we got ahead of the cathedone problem. One, we were told that there was going to be some sort of a fentanyl. And the only thing we knew about that at that time was a medical grade patch fentanyl. And then another one would be an LSD that was so strong you'd be having flashbacks the rest of your life.
So the fentanyl is a tranquilizer. Is that what that is?
No, the fentanyl is it's an opioid. It's for pain.
Got it. Right.
So, and it's used instead of heroin. So, or morphine, one or the other. So the shelves got depleted of the Flocka in Broward County, and then the fentanyl started coming in, laced into the heroin, and then they started lacing it into the cocaine, into the crystal meth. Now they're even lacing it into marijuana. And that's dealing with the problems that we have on the streets of Broward and Palm Beach
So
counties
is that
today.
what's causing a lot of these overdoses and things of that nature?
2 years ago, we were having 5 deaths a day in Broward County. And actually we had, because we're up to about 15 or 20 different analogs of fentanyl that are being laced into the heroin, the cocaine, and the crystal meth today. The strongest being carfentanil, which is 10,000 times stronger than morphine, 100 times stronger than heroin. And when this first started coming in, they really didn't know how to mix this drug, and that's one reason why we're having so many deaths. It only takes a couple of flakes.
And I think you told me, is this the drug that can be, basically if you touch it, it can kill you, right? Because you told the story about the police dogs.
Absolutely. Yeah, 2 flakes on your skin, you can overdose. There's been deputies, there's YouTube videos of deputies in New Jersey where they were they found a white substance in a car and they put it in an evidence bag, and they were just closing the evidence bag, and a couple little flakes puffed up out of the bag. They both overdosed. Luckily, first responders came, they had Narcan in their truck, and they were able to revive the 2 deputies that were on Narcan. There was an incident where there was dogs that came into a scene. It was a halfway house where 2 people had overdosed. And they searched the house, they swept the house, and didn't find anything. The house was clean. They had also been looking at this house for money laundering for a time. So there was 2 money dogs there and 1 drug dog. They came back to the living room to bivouac, to talk, and there was a coffee table there, clean, all cleaned off. All 3 dogs put their paws on the coffee table. All 3 dogs overdosed. There was a residue of carfentanil on the coffee table. Luckily, first responders came. Narcan works on dogs also. All 3 dogs are back to work today, so they're back and they're fine. So this is the major problem that we're dealing with in Broward County at the time. We got a hold ahead of the Flocka alpha PVP problem. Now we're dealing with this fentanyl. The 1 grade of fentanyl is a W18. There's a W1 to W32. W18 is the strongest. There's U4-7700, and there's a lot of different.
It's complicated
fentanyls.
stuff, Don.
It is. So we don't need to really get into that, but that's what lets you know why some people overdose a little bit faster. People that use it more, use other drugs, are going to overdose faster. But the stronger grades of the fentanyl, like the carfentanil, that's deadly. Your lower grades, you might, if you do overdose on that, you might get pulled out with 2 milligrams of fentanyl, like 1 dose or 2 doses, to U4-7700, where you might need 6 doses. To where you get the carfentanil, you might have to start with 10 doses to pull you out of it, which is starting to get dangerous. But then when you get to the hospital, they usually put you on an IV drip of Narcan just to keep you alive.
So, one of the other things I heard you talk about is the fact that, on some of these instances where, the police or EMTs are called to a scene, sometimes, 1 dose of Narcan isn't reviving the person. So does that mean the drugs are getting stronger and stronger?
Well, that's the different analogs of the fentanyl. Like a W18, 2 doses might pull you right out of it. So if it's a stronger U4-7700, you might have to give them 6 doses. And the deputies carry the nasal spray, which isn't the same effect as if you're getting an injection from the first responders, from the paramedics, but that's what the deputies carry on the street. So, but it keeps them alive. You just can keep spraying in the nose depending on what analog it is, but you keep them alive until the first responders get there. We were having a real problem because of some of these stronger analogs that they would get someone to the emergency room. They would come out of it. They didn't want any help. They just wanted to get out. They would leave AMA and go right outside and
in the parking lot of the
overdose
hospital
again. And everybody say, "Oh, gee, they just left the hospital. They used again." Well, Narcan wears off in 30 to 40 minutes. Usually because of the strong fentanyls that they're taking mixed in with the cocaine or the heroin, they didn't reuse. It's just that the Narcan wore off, and the same amount of drug that was in the system, they would re-overdose on. So it's not that they used again.
So does that mean we shouldn't be releasing people so quick from the ER?
Well, as I said, a lot of times they're leaving AMA. They're just getting up and walking
Right, they
out.
can't stop
So
them.
what we did at the Broward Sheriff's Office and the United Way and the Wellness Center, we got together and we started a pilot program with Holy Cross Hospital to where if we could get someone into the emergency room with an overdose, the charge nurse would just call one number, would call Henderson's central receiving system. And if they wanted to get some help, they would send a peer specialist, which is someone that's in recovery, that's possibly gone through the same thing, to go right to the hospital. And sometimes they'd be staged there or they'd be there within a half an hour to talk to this person that just overdosed, to let them know that there is hope, there is recovery. And if you do want help, we can make this phone call. We can have the van come and get an assessment. So if they wanted the help, Henderson would send a van down. The Wellness Center would be involved with the peer specialist. We would send the person back to Henderson, which is this is the central receiving system, which is a 23-hour turnaround. They just get assessed and get placed into the community or into recovery. And normally it's a BARC, but BARC is full. In fact, we just opened up a brand new building for BARC.
It's already full.
The Detox Center, which I was part of that because I'm the president of the advisory board of BARC. It's taken me 17 years to get that building open, and it's 50 detox beds. But 17 years ago, 50 detox beds would have been enough.
Not anymore.
Today, it doesn't even scratch the surface. So we went out to the community, and we went out to all the community resources, and we started putting together scholarship beds where people that are in the business would, whether it be detox or inpatient, IOPs, whatever it might be, would offer up beds. So when they would get their assessment from Henderson, then they would call, if BARC is full, which it normally is, then we would call on one of the beds, scholarship beds, so they would get right into recovery. Because up till now, if they're waiting for BARC, which if they're full, there's nothing else you can do. They say,
back out
come
on the
back
street
tomorrow, come back in 2 days. Well, an addict's not going to wait 2 days or tomorrow. They're going to go right out and get high again. So, but this gets them in a bed immediately. That started March 1st. Right now, we're getting Broward Health on board and hopefully get their 4 or 5 facilities on board so we can do the same thing with them, covering the whole county of Broward County. I did a presentation, I think you were at St. Joan of
Yeah,
Arc.
the one here in Boca.
And from that presentation, I was contacted by Boca Hospital, and we're helping them now to start the same thing at Boca Hospital, to have
great.
a peer specialist in the emergency room.
You know, I think, one of the things I've been talking to, that we have the Sober Homes Task Force up here, is about using the Marchman Act, at the hospital. So what didn't seem to be that well known was the fact that there were 2 provisions within the Marchman Act that allowed either law enforcement or a doctor in an emergency room, a bit like a Baker Act, to really initiate a 72-hour hold, which would obviously stop the person going out. But the problem has been is, okay, well, that's great. We'll initiate a 72-hour hold. Where do you want to send them? Because with the Baker Act, there are designated receiving facilities, right?
Exactly.
Here in Delray, you've got South County for Palm Beach, and then JFK's in the north end of Palm Beach County. But when it comes to issues of substance abuse, somebody overdoses, they go to the ER. Now, maybe either the law enforcement that brought him in or the doctor in the ER, he wants to initiate a 72-hour hold under a Marchman Act, but there's nowhere to put him. Where do you hold him?
That's always been a problem, and the difference between the Marchman Act and the Baker Act. We've tried to combine them. For years, we've tried to get the Marchman Act and the Baker Act to work together, but there's no money for the Marchman Act. And then the money, there is money for the Baker Act, so they don't want to share that. That's why they've never put it together. In Broward County, there's only one Marchman Act receiving facility, which was the old Fort Lauderdale Hospital. They're the only ones that had the license for that. So there really isn't any place to bring them where they're going to be held. So the only thing to do is to file the Marchman Act and go to a hearing, and then they're bound to get an assessment. You've got to go back to the court, follow up whatever the assessment said. But the only hold you have on them if they don't go for the assessment or don't go for treatment is a contempt of court charge.
Right, and that's one of the loopholes or the weaknesses, I think, of the Marchman Act, and I've been talking about it. I know that there's, we've got Mike Gottlieb, who's a state representative down in Broward, who I've spoken to. Of mine. Good guy, yep. Really good guy, and I know he's trying to fill some of the holes, and he's been consulting with me and some of the other Marchman Act lawyers. And the other problem is, obviously, if I get a court order in Broward and somebody runs to Palm Beach because they walked out of treatment, is can I get the sheriff's office up here to enforce a Broward pickup order? I haven't tried it yet, but I've tried it in other jurisdictions, and they're like it's civil in nature. We don't want to take the responsibility. Right. So I mean, there's only so much.
And there's
you
only
can do.
2 deputies at a time that are there doing pickups.
I know, in Broward
they're concentrating with the Baker Act.
Yeah, I know. I've spoken to the team there. They're good people. I got them on speed dial. They're overworked. I'll tell you that. They work hard. So what's going on recently with the street drugs? Because every time we chat, there's a new drug of choice out there. So
there's always going to be a drug. I mean, people use drugs. People don't want to face reality. There's always going to be a drug. We still dealing, as I said before, we had 5 deaths a day when the fentanyl first came out being mixed into the drugs. Right now, we're down to 1.47 deaths a day over the past 2.5 years. Hopefully, some of that is from the education we've been doing all around the county, both Palm Beach and Broward. A lot of that is from Narcan deployment, getting all the deputies to be able to carry Narcan. The first weekend that the deputies were carrying Narcan, they saved 4 lives. So we know that works. We just got a big grant to be able to fund Narcan through the Broward Sheriff's Office, and to be able to hire 4 more peer specialists to get into the emergency rooms, and that will be a pass-through grant with BARC to be able to get this done. And another big grant for Narcan, which is more than we will need at the Broward Sheriff's Office, so we've been able to get approval to be able to distribute that to other agencies and to other people that that can use the Narcan to save lives. So that's what we're doing now as far as the peer specialists in the emergency rooms. But the big problem that we're dealing with right now in all the schools, whether we're dealing with middle schools or high schools, is the vaping. And the one type of vaping is called the Juul.
Is that the little thing the kids stick in their mouths?
Well, it looks like a thumb drive.
Right.
It plugs into the computer. That's how you charge the battery. Now, this is a nicotine device. This isn't alternative to smoking. This isn't for someone to try to take this to cut down or quit smoking. This is smoking, but with not getting the smell on your clothes or not getting the smell on your car. So about 1.5 years ago, we were starting to see a little bit of a problem. I was asked to go into a couple of schools to see what was happening.
Where are these things coming from?
Well, they're loaded. They sell them in the stores. They're in all the vape stores. Or a kid can get on Amazon online and get it mailed right to the house. But they come with a pod, which is filled with nicotine, and it's different levels of nicotine. So if you've ever smoked, or anyone has ever smoked, if you take a puff of a cigarette, you get a little lightheaded if you've never smoked before. So the kids are taking these pods with the nicotine, going from a low-level nicotine and gradually getting higher and higher. And it was a major problem. They were starting to have to close down some bathrooms in some of these private schools so they could monitor the other bathrooms. But they were still just smoking and using this Juul for the nicotine. I said, it's not going to take long before they figure a way to get something else into that. I did something on Channel 10 Eyewitness News. It was on May, 1 year ago. And I said that exact same statement. Within a month or two, they had learned how to take a hypodermic and put the high-potency THC honey oil into the pod instead of the nicotine.
So so are they emptying it out, or are they just using it and then they're injecting?
They can empty it out or use it and then inject the honey oil.
So when we say honey oil, what is a?
That's the butter, the wax, the high potency THC. Back in the '60s, when I was a kid, the THC content in marijuana was 3 to 5%. Then years later, when hydroponics came out and some of the stronger strains of marijuana, the THC content went up to 15 to 20% that we thought was mind-boggling.
Right. So THC is I guess the compound within marijuana that gives you the high.
That's what gets you the high.
Right.
That's different from the CBD. That doesn't get you high. It's CBD oil. So they've come up with this new process, and they just take the leaves, the stems, the buds, and they soak it in a solvent, usually butane. As it soaks through the solvent, it comes out in this buttery, globby mess. That's called butter or wax because it looks like butter and wax. Naturally, with nothing else laced into this, it's 85 to 95% THC. A lot of times it acts has the same effect as a synthetic drug because it's so potent. It's so potent that when kids start using this, their IQs drop 8 to 10 points, and they have erratic behavior. So they learn to put this honey oil into the pod, and they're smoking this in the schools now. The problem being, and we're trying to educate everybody and trying to educate parents especially, because a lot of parents still think, it's only marijuana, no big deal.
Right.
Well, when the kids get caught with the jewel with honey oil in it in any school right now, they're arrested on a second-degree felony. I don't even think that it's right. I've talked to the public defender, I've talked to the prosecutor. We've got to look into this in the future. But right now, that charge is sticking. If you get caught with a cigarette or just a jewel with tobacco, it's only a 3-day suspension. You get caught with the honey oil, and they test it right on the spot in the school, second-degree felony. These might be kids coming from great parents, great homes, doing well in school, getting ready to go to college. Well, forget about it.
They have potentially a felony conviction sitting out there.
They have a second-degree felony. You're not going to get a student loan. You're not going to get housing. And if they decide, I'm not going to go to college, I want to get a job.
Who's going to employ them?
Well, besides that, they can't rent an apartment. So they're going to have to stay home. These are the ramifications of getting caught with a jewel with this honey oil in it or any other vaping device. And we've got to get the word out to parents that this is no joke. This is serious.
So at the beginning of the show, you talked about the fact that some of these drugs now, they're not really showing up, say, in a urine analysis.
No.
If the kids are smoking this honey oil,
that does show up.
It does show up. Okay, so the parents could test the kid, they'd know.
That's actual THC.
Okay.
But now they've found with other vaping devices that they can put a ceramic disc into the vaping device where they don't have to use any kind of liquid. Now they can use the leaf. Now it could be marijuana leaf, but it also can be synthetic, where that was tobacco laced with the cathinones that I said before, and vape synthetic marijuana, which before you had to smoke it, but now you can vape it. That's not going to show up on a drug test.
Crazy.
It is crazy. Times are changing. It's serious, and everyone wants to escape. I talk a little bit now. I've looked into this since 1989 about genes and the addictive gene. We've localized it. We know the addictive genes, the one allele gene with the D2, DR receptors, and then it goes to the D3, D4 receptors of what you're potentially addicted to. If parents could get to a place where they would swab their younger children, infants, or, because your personality is formed between the age of 2 and 6, which pretty much determines the way you're going to be the rest of your life. But if you could find out if you had the addictive gene, normally it just means you have a lower level of dopamine. Sometimes it could mean you have higher dopamine, but usually it's lower levels. Which if the parent knew that and a toddler, there's natural ways to raise dopamine levels through diet, exercise, to where the child doesn't know that there's anything different because they never felt any different, but they don't feel deep joy inside, or they might not feel like they belong or fit in. And they go along like that, and then all of a sudden they turn 11, 12, 13 years old, and they try marijuana or alcohol for the first time. It's not the problem. It's the answer to all the problems, because it's the first time in their life that they might feel like they fit in.
Right, they feel like they're part of a group, and I've heard that before too.
Now, sure, they had a choice in the beginning, but that's the answer to all their problems. How do you take that away when they finally found the answer that never knew they were missing, but now finally lets them feel deep joy? So that's why looking into these genes is going to be so important in the future, to try to find out if they do have an addictive gene and raise those dopamine levels when they're younger. Because we've done studies now that if a child or a teenager starts smoking marijuana or alcohol at age 13, there's a 47% chance that they're going to have mental health issues and a substance abuse issue when they become an adult, because our brains aren't developed till we're about 25. If you had waited till age 18 before you started marijuana or alcohol, there's only like a 22% chance. If you waited till age 21, there's only a 9% chance. So it's a matter of letting the brain develop. So I'm not telling kids that you can never smoke marijuana or never drink alcohol, but give yourself a chance. Let your brain develop a little more. So when you're 13 starting, remember, you've got almost a 50% chance.
They'll have issues.
You're going to have mental health issues or substance abuse issues when you become an adult.
Do you think there's any connection between some of these issues we see? Because a lot of the time when I'm Marchman Acting somebody, I mean, most of the kids I Marchman Act between ages 18 and 30, but there's some history of mental illness that goes along. It's very rare there's just standalone addiction, right? There's something going on. A lot of the time I'm seeing maybe at an early age where the child was prescribed a medication for ADD, ADHD. I'm not poo-pooing those because maybe there's a time they're appropriate, but I do see a pattern between kids who are prescribed, Adderall and things of that nature at an early age, and kids who then go on sort of that slippery slope towards addiction. Is there anything that you're seeing there?
Been saying that for years, and just like you said, there's some cases where it's absolutely necessary, but some doctors are just too easily to prescribe those drugs, and a lot of adolescents and kids, younger kids, that really should be taking other forms of therapy, because it does give them a propensity, and we've seen that just from all the studies, to want to get into taking drugs when they're a teenager, just to feel normal in their mind. It's like taking psychotropics, or if you do have any kind of a mental illness, and talking about cathinones, they magnify a mental illness about 10 times. But if you're taking any kind of medications for a mental illness or bipolar, for those people that, if you had a baseline of the way people felt normally, they would just be below the baseline. And they remember what it's like to get the spikes, to get the highs and the lows, and they miss those highs. And they feel just below normal when they're taking the medication. Almost everyone that I've ever dealt with that's on medication finds a way to forget to get their prescription filled, or they lose their prescription. Any way that they don't have to take it so they can self-medicate, because they miss those highs. They don't want to feel below normal all the time. And that's a lot of that is by they stop doing their therapy and they stop working with their groups, and then they stop taking the medication. But it's because they want to feel that high, because they're having a hard time dealing with life on life's terms, uncovering that onion and just feeling with all the things that they never learned how to cope with, and developing a coping mechanism just to be able to deal with life on life's terms.
So where do you see us going from here forward? I mean, what's the next step? How do we get this under control? What do moms and dads do if they're starting to see signs that there may be some problems with their kids?
As I said before, moms and dads, absolutely, you can't trust the drug tests.
They're really the front line for this stuff.
Absolutely. If they suspect that their children are using drugs, they're probably using drugs. When we were dealing with the flock epidemic, this was coming in, and one of our biggest drug suppliers now is UPS, the mailbox, the U.S. mail. They deliver these things in the mail. When we were dealing with Flocka, kids were starting to stay home. I had parents telling me, Johnny is doing great now. He's staying home. He's in his room all night. He's doing homework. And then gradually his behavior would start to change. And finally he would give him up, because as long as you get away with something, you have to keep pushing that line. That's just human nature. So when they would finally find out that he was using, they'd look behind the dresser or underneath the drawers, and they'd find these DHL packages where this drug was being delivered a couple of times a week to the house in the afternoon before the parents came home.
They didn't know it was coming.
So they're delivering right to the house. So, that's still happening with a lot of your edibles. They're coming in from Nevada, from Las Vegas, and they're being sent in the one-size-fits-all mail packages. We know that it's being trucked in. You talk about legalizing marijuana. If 12 to 17-year-olds, if in states where there's no legalization at all, 12 to 17-year-olds, 2.2% are smoking marijuana anyway. You legalize medical marijuana, that jumps up to 6%. States where it's fully legalized, recreational, that jumps up to 8.5%. And it's not because of the availability, it's just the acceptance. So the more marijuana is accepted in society, the more younger kids are going to be doing it. And that's not because they get a medical marijuana card, that's just because of acceptance.
And they have access to it.
And they have access, they start doing it. So, getting back to what can we do, what can parents do, be aware, know what your kids are doing, don't be their friend. You are not your child's friend, you are your child's parent. Look through their backpacks. Go through their drawers. You're the parent. That's your job. That's what you're supposed to do. And then the other thing is what I was talking about before. I would love to see parents start with young children and do gene therapy to see if they have the addictive gene. And all it really means is, like I said, lower levels of dopamine most of the time. You can do something about that. Diet, exercise. Don't let your kids sit home behind the computer or playing on the iPhone. They got to get outside and run around and play.
I know I did as a kid.
Sure. They call you at 6 o'clock, you come in and have dinner. And the family ate together. That's the family unit. And we've gotten away from that.
Wow, this is great stuff. I really appreciate you coming in to talk about this. Is there anything on the Broward Sheriff's Office website where they can find out information?
No, but on the United Way of Broward.
United Way. Okay. Do you happen to know their website address?
UnitedWayofBroward.org.
What's that?
Drugfreebroward.org.
Drugfreebroward.org. Okay, great. All right, Don, thanks for coming in.
Oh, I'm glad you have me. I'm glad to get this out.
Well, I'm glad you're healed.
Thank you. I'll be healed. I'll be back out there soon.
All right. Well, I want to know when your next rodeo is. I might have to come and see you. My niece is a big horsey person, so I'll tell her all about what you're doing. All right, folks. Thanks for tuning in. You can follow us on my personal page, Mark Giasta. There's the Drug and Alcohol Tonys, also the Facebook page, YouTube, our website, Instagram, Twitter. I think that just about covers everything. And if you've got any questions, you can reach out to me, Mark at drugandalcoholattorneys.com, or just call us, 561-419-6095. And thanks, Don, for coming in.
Thanks for having me.
I mean, every time I hear you speak, I'm blown away. So
there's still a lot more that we could cover. Things are changing all the time.
They keep changing. I know that.
They keep changing analogs. And, what we're doing now, we mentioned about the synthetic marijuana and how they skirted the law from bath salts to Molly to Flocka. All the bad guys were trying to do at that time was skirt the law. And that's why they're called designer drugs. They are designed to break the law. The unintended effect every time they tweaked a molecule was it changed the effect of the drug. So right now with the synthetic marijuana being laced with cathinones and changing the analogs almost weekly, it's just a matter of time before smoking synthetic marijuana, you're going to be seeing excited deliriums again, just like Flocka, because it is Flocka. And you're going to see the people running around naked on the streets again, going through excited deliriums, and it's just going to be synthetic marijuana. A lot of Flocka cases back in 2015 that we labeled Flocka, we know now was smoking synthetic marijuana, because Flocka and synthetic marijuana are sprayed with the same chemical.
Wow. Exciting times coming, I guess, right? Crazy stuff.
It's coming.
Thanks, Don. Good to see you, my friend.
Good seeing you.